Today we're going to talk about the Certificate of Eligibility Ineligibility Tool. One of the things that we've all seen as a TA specialist or VR specialist, or I don't even know what our title is anymore, the people who come floating around in your area. One of the things that we've seen across the board is a lot of programs struggling with understanding eligibility, understanding the process of eligibility, and making sure that we capture solid data to support that eligibility. In response to that, we came up with this tool, and it's all about making life easier for the program and for the staff involved in that determination of eligibility. Today we're going to go over the tool, and as we go through the tool, we're going to also delve into some of the fundamentals or components of the eligibility process. So please, ask questions. If you're confused or want clarification, stop us. We got a team of people here, and we're also going to use the people on the call as a sounding board to help answer those questions. So go ahead, John. And Suzanne's been working with me on these webinars before, so she knows she can jump in and stop me, because sometimes I get off track. I don't know if people know that about me, but I'm a little distractible.
No, you're not. You're actually. I think that what happens is there's so much that you want to share that we do take sidebars. I think we all take a little a little ride down the ski slope a bit. So.
So I'm going to let you go do this one, Suzanne. Go ahead.
Okay. So locating the tool that. It's a great tool. Wish I would have had one of these when I was a director. It's not on our website yet, but it will be, and you can locate the COE tool on the AIVRTTAC.org website, and you would hover over resources, and then you would go to products and tools, and then in that window you would scroll down till you find the AIVRS Program Certificate of Eligibility Ineligibility, which is the COE tool. And John has it up there for you if you so that you can see how to do that process. It's and you click on the tool, and then you can download it. Click on it and download, and then open it up, and then there is the tool, and it gives you, well, and then we'll allow Wayne to continue, because it will give you it gives you all the pages that you need and the tool. So we're going to go through the PowerPoint first, and it's in your ballpark, Wayne.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne.
Learning and outcomes. We need the objectives. Next slide, John. Thank you.
So the goal today is we want you to be able to determine an applicant's eligibility or ineligibility within the 60-day time limit that is set forth by RSA and the CFR. We want to provide consistency in determining the eligibility or ineligibility, and we want to utilize the 6 eligibility criteria for determining that eligibility. For many years, it was only 5, and under WIOA, they've added a 6. And really, in my mind, what they did was break up the 5th requirement. So there's really no additional work we have to do. It's just making sure that we capture it in that 6th component. Next slide, John. Okay, so here's some questions that we kind of want you guys to jot down. Take a minute amongst yourself. If you have a team of people, if you're on your own, sorry, we gotta do that. You're going to be the lone man on the hill, or lone woman on the hill. Answer these 6 questions for us, please, in the chat box. That would be fantastic. We'll take about 5 minutes and let you guys do that. Have a discussion and answer it. If you have questions while you're answering these or looking at these questions, please feel free to throw them out there at us, and we'll answer them the best we can. And I really wish I had some Jeopardy music. I would start playing it right now. So the first,
Yeah, I was
so
just going to say, go ahead.
okay. So the first question we have is, who in the AIVRS program determines the eligibility or ineligibility for services? Question 2, when does an AIVRS program staff member start to evaluate the eligibility, ineligibility of an applicant? Number 3, what are the 6 eligibility criteria and how is each determined and documented? What are the steps for documenting the eligibility, ineligibility of an applicant? Number 5, what occurs if an applicant cannot be determined eligible? And number 6, if an external assessment is required, can your AIVRS program pay for those services before an individual is determined eligible or ineligible for VR services? So again, we don't want, the CFR language and the full-blown definition. We just need to have what your thoughts are. Please put them into the chat box, and we'll be watching that as we go along. And again, I can probably sing and dance a little bit if people can entertain me. Now you guys don't want that. I've been told I only dance for dollars, so really I need to stop.
Well, it looks like the time is ticking away. We're down to 3 minutes and 51 seconds. Thank you, John, for the time clock. We are getting some answers.
Yes, good deal.
And I think it might be a little difficult to answer all of them at one time, so, but maybe verbally. And we do have some, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind putting your picture up there, doing the video. You know, there's down at the bottom where the mute button is, next to it is the stop video. Maybe we'd like to see your cheery faces this morning and where you are. Clyde wants to know what the question number 3 means.
Question number 3, what are the 6 eligibility criteria and how is each determined and documented? So when you're determining eligibility, what are the criteria that you look for to have that individual become eligible?
And think of the very first thing you want to do is the individual a member of a federal or state recognized tribe? That's one of them, and that should get you on a roll as to what maybe the others are. And they have increased over time in terms of, I remember when I started, we were only talking about 4, and then it kind of, it's kind of grown. So we're up to 6. And we'll be Wayne will be going over those 6. Thanks for the question.
Okay. So we're getting quite a few responses in the chat box. Good deal.
Yes, yes, we are.
Does anybody want to open up their microphone and throw out some ideas, or you good where we're at?
Well, we're good where we're at.
On number 3, would that be your social security card, your member of a state or federally recognized tribe, proof of residence, medical documentation? Is the disability causing an impediment to employment, and do they want to work? Maybe.
Yay!
You're close. Yes, you're very close.
I'm missing something somewhere.
That's okay. That's okay. You did good.
See, everybody thought that, we're professionals now. We don't have pop quizzes, and then you get on the phone and you're like, crap, what are these guys doing to me?
So
this was Suzanne's idea too. If anybody's upset, it's Suzanne's idea. If you guys enjoy this exercise, it's all mine.
Okay, buddy. Okay, you know what? I'm looking through this, and question number 1, everybody seems to be on the same page with that one. Counselor and director. Oh, I shouldn't open my mouth, huh?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I think we can go ahead and start looking through the answers. We're down to 30 seconds, so.
Yeah, it's hard for people to, we're getting answers to one. Number two, at application and within 60 days. So when does the AIVRS program staff member start to evaluate the eligibility, ineligibility of an applicant? At application and within 60 days, right? And we had the question on number three. Here's another one for an answer for question two. Evaluation begins at intake. And number three from, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Is it Mika?
Yeah, Miyaka.
Mika. Okay, great. Thank you. Why don't you tell us what number three is? And since you're right there, go for it.
I don't know if I know all six. I just know we require a Social Security card, some kind of indication that you are a member of a state or federally recognized tribe, proof that you live on or near our service area, 4, that you require psychological or medical documentation of a disability.
Right.
That disability is causing an impediment or employment barrier. And one of the important questions is, do you want to work?
Perfect.
And then think of a sixth one. I think that's 5 or 6.
That's good. You've kind of encapsulated all of them. That's really good.
I really appreciate everybody putting their thoughts in here.
Oh, there's one. Someone put, can you benefit? I like that.
Yeah. Benefit.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to continue on. I'm not going to answer these questions right off the bat. I want to go through the rest of the webinar, and we're going to pick up these answers as we go along, and we'll pick them up out of the tool as well. So once we go through the training material, we'll have an example of the tool, and we'll go through it piece by piece, so you can see where all of these components come together to make a functional tool. I really appreciate these answers that we've got going on, and Suzanne was absolutely right. They're all pretty close to similar. We're seeing a lot of the same themes, so that's refreshing and good to know. Go ahead, John. Okay, so the design of the tool is to assist all program staff in determining eligibility or ineligibility of an applicant within 60 days. So every program has their own internal structure. There's programs that have VR counselors and directors that determine eligibility. There's programs that have a VR tech that assist in the determination of eligibility, with the final say being with the VR counselor. So as an AIVRS program, we get to identify who our experts are in the field. And right now, the experts that are seen in the ability to determine eligibility are the VR counselors. They have the required training and expertise to make those determinations. On the first page of this tool, we just give you a basic outline of how to use the tool. The second page provides a recommended sample VR process. And again, each AIVRS program creates their own process that is unique to their program and community. One thing that we do make a recommendation is, in every step of the VR process, we document it. We have to have that case management component in there to tell the story. That story is so vital when you have an outside audit, or if we have a counselor that leaves, it allows that next person to jump in, read the case file, and start providing services at the point of where the other person left. So it's very important that we document every step of the process. Go ahead, John. The third and fourth pages of the tool provide a working document. And in that document, we note the 6 eligibility criteria with check boxes and explanations for brief descriptions of the benchmarks and how they were determined. We also include the signatures of the VR counselor and the program director to provide validity of the document. Some programs don't require the director to sign off. Some programs do. When I was a director, we had anytime we trained somebody new, it was a 30 or 60-day period of time where I would check their work after the training was complete. I would just review the cases quarterly or at a staff meeting if there's any issue. So it's per program, per director. And then the box for office use is extremely helpful because it provides that checkbox for the eligible or ineligible determination and the dates of that determination. Serena, we will have all of this webinar. Oh, Nona answered. Thank you. Next slide, John. Okay, so in developing this tool, one of the main discussions that we had was that we wanted to be able to provide the AIVRS community with a tool that allowed for consistency to be developed. One of the things that we noticed across multiple programs, and if anybody's been in the AIVRS world a long time, it's that we all like to do our own thing. None of us really get together and say, hey, let's all do the same thing. And that's what makes our service provision so unique and great across all the different tribal programs. So in doing that, we still have to have some consistency in the forms that are required by RSA and the CFR. So in doing that, we created this tool so you can experience that consistency. It's a great safeguard to ensure that we're meeting all of our obligations to provide impartial and equal opportunity for all applicants. Next slide. So here's the 6 eligibility criteria. As we noted earlier, it used to be 4. When I was a state VR counselor, it was 3. Now it was 5, and now it's up to 6. So the first one is the applicant has to have proof of membership in a state or federally recognized tribe. They have to be whatever document you guys use to show that proof. Number 2, the applicant has to reside on or near the reservation or within the designated geographical tribal service area. So in your grant, when it was written, that service area was defined. And that's what is the area that you can determine eligibility in. There has to exist a documented physical and or mental impairment. And that's any disability under the sun. It's not just physical, it's not just, mental health or cognitive or I just lost the word I was thinking of. Hearing loss, sensory, that type of thing. It's everything under the sun. Then number 4, does the applicant impairment create substantial impediment to the applicant's employment? Is it interrupting their ability to work? Is there a barrier that's being created from this issue? Can the applicant benefit in terms of an employment outcome from VR services? And then the 6th one is, do they require VR services? So when we start looking at 5 and 6, those in my mind were always we're always connected to begin with, and now it's being broken down into the 6 components. So like I said, it's all there. It's always been there. It's just a little longer version now. Next slide. Okay, on pages 5 through 7 of the AIVRS tool, or the COE tool, we have what's labeled a disability level. And that disability level was a document that was, well, I basically copied it from the state when I was working at the state because I thought it was such a valuable tool in identifying impairments and limitations from disabilities. And so I brought it across into the tool because it helps identify daily living skills that are impacted by the disability or disabilities. It talks about the related impediments. It shows the severity of disability and the related impediments. And it also helps identify areas of limitations. Okay, so once we get to that document, you'll get a better understanding. Right now, it's just kind of me talking about it. And I think we can go ahead and go to the tool now, John, and go through that.
One of the things, Dick Corbridge also created a document that had a similar look to it. So you're not you're not the only one borrowing. He borrowed, I think, from the federal. So we have a federal and state.
Yeah. Well, I think all these tools at some point have their multiple borrowing taking place.
Absolutely.
Okay, John. So let's go ahead and can we make this a little bit bigger, or what's the view? On my view, it's not full screen. Are you guys seeing it okay? Somebody go ahead and give me a thumbs up or a head nod or something out there.
It looks good.
Okay. All right. So this is the introduction and the instructions. This is the page 1 that we talked about. This will be available on the website very quickly. It's in its final stages of being approved and vetted. It'll also be put to the clearinghouse for everybody's access. So as we look through this, there's some possible uses for this tool. One is conducting staff training to become familiar with the VR process. Number 2 is building the consistency. Number 3 is improving and maintaining effective case management, improving data collection and management. And 5, internally evaluating and assessing your VR counselor skills and knowledge. Okay, so here's the instructions. I'm not going to read them verbatim. Basically, we're going to review the process flow chart. We're going to talk about the different sections of the tool, and then I'm going to open it up for you guys to ask some questions as needed. Go ahead and keep going down, John. So here's the sample VR process. We have recruitment, outreach, referral, orientation, intake, application, eligibility, cases open, IPE development, provision of services, employment, and then case closure, and then post-employment services. Okay. So what this tool focuses on right now is really the application to eligibility to the opening of the case. That's what the certificate of eligibility does, is it opens up the active cases. Next page, John. So now we're getting into the actual form. This is where you would start inputting the data. So up front we have the demographic stuff, case number, address, client name. On number 1, it's a really easy checkbox tool, and it goes right off the 6 criteria. Is there proof of membership? Yes or no? How was it determined? You'd put in there whatever your tribe or your area utilizes as the source of determining enrollment. Number 2, applicant resides on or near blank reservation or within the service area. Yes or no? Put in your tribal reservation name, and then how was it determined? So remember, in the determination or the supporting documentation showing the residency, it has to be a physical address. It can't be a PO box that doesn't show residency. So in a situation where the driver's license has the physical address on it, you can use a driver's license. If not, then you need to look at an electricity bill, gas bill. Google Maps is great. You can just Google your office to that home address and print it out. I've even had maps drawn on napkins showing where they live. Just anything showing a physical address. Number 3, exists a documented physical or mental impairment. Yes or no? What are the impairment? So a lot of people at this point, what I've seen across all the years of TA work I've done is people list 5 disabilities. Okay. my recommendation is we don't list 5. We pick a primary and a secondary. Because once you identify those disabilities in the eligibility certificate, you have to address those specific disabilities in the IPE. So the two have to be connected. And I don't want to go much further into the IPE development part of it. Just knowing that whatever you put into your certificate of eligibility has to be addressed in your IPE. And further in this document, you're going to see where we identify the services and the barriers that need to be addressed. But again, when you identify the documented physical or mental impairments, look at a primary and a secondary, because those are what you have to address. If you have multiple disabilities, you address those in a case note and say, you know, these are identified as well. They're secondary or co-occurring impacts, but the primary and secondary disabilities are blah, blah, blah. Okay, because once you put it into the case note, it's identified in the case file, and it's easier to address services to those other disabilities. Then you look at how was this determined? So where was it found? Where did you find this identified diagnosis? Did you just pull it out of thin air? Well, we can't do that, right? So there's got to be some medical documentation or whatever documentation that you have that's viable and accepted now for determining disabilities. Number 4, we look at, does the applicant's impairments create substantial impediment to employment? Yes or no? If yes, give an explanation of how it's impacting them. Number 5, applicant. Oh, I skipped. How was this determined? Again, you go in and just write, I reviewed medical documentations, I reviewed whatever assessment, this is what it was.
On this one, the other thing that needs to be considered is when an individual comes into your office, right there and then, for me, the eligibility process started in terms of if an individual thinks they have a disability, that's one of the important and significant areas that we sometimes overlook as when we're going through the determining of eligibility. A person can claim, I have a disability and this is what it is. Yes, we need medical proof because we're paying VR dollars to provide services, but it's really important to remember and respect the Americans with Disability Act that said, if I'm saying that I have a disability, then I have a disability or an impairment. So keep that in mind, that your consumer's client, when they self-advocate for themselves or self-claim a disability, that must be taken seriously. Thank you, Wayne.
Yep. So number 5, the applicant can benefit in terms of employment outcome from VR services. So when we talk about terms of employment outcome, what this really looks at is, can they find a job, or is the job going to allow them to sustain medical treatment? Is it going to increase their quality of living? Is the disability creating a barrier to gaining that employment? So that we kind of start looking at all that stuff and answer those questions. And we look at that through the information we collect. But really, we're also looking at the client's voice, the story. What are we finding from this individual? How is it impacting them? And then we make a determination if our services are going to be able to remove any of those barriers or help overcome those barriers. Number 6, the applicant requires VR services to prepare for, enter into, engage in, or retain employment, consistent with the strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capability, informed choice. that standard language right, out of CFR. We hear it all the time. I call it the grade 8 because I get tired of saying all those words together, and really I can't memorize that many words. So grade 8's easier for me. But we take into concern, into that grade 8, we take into those into our consideration, and we ask ourselves, does the applicant require VR services? So instead of really breaking it down and explaining it, I'm going to give you an example, because I find that an example really helps me understand what requires VR services means. So let's say we have an individual that is had a back injury, a spinal cord injury. They are diagnosed as a paraplegic. That individual has an IT degree or a computer programming degree, and they come into our office and they're asking for services. We complete an application, we gather the documentation. One other thing we have to look at, and that's part of eligibility and benefits of employment outcome, is we look at the labor market in our area. And let's say that there's openings as a computer tech at the tribe. We have to look at that individual's ability to gain employment based on the limitations that we see, but also the transferable work skills they bring to the table. Because this individual is able to do the work and is able to fill out applications and doesn't have impairments related to employability other than general accessibility and maybe some workplace accommodations, they wouldn't require VR services. The same as somebody that came in that was, let's say, an oil rig worker, they had an amputation on their leg, all their skills, background is oil work, rig hands, they would be in the requires VR services category because they have nothing that allows them to pursue employment on their own. So a lot of times what we get stuck in at this point is we view VR as providing services to people to take this step up into employment, and it's not accurate. All VR services do is level the playing field. We give our people with disabilities an equal opportunity to pursue competitive employment, competitive integrated employment in the community. We don't give them a one-up. We don't give them extra stuff based on just the definition of what VR services are supposed to do to assist our consumers. We level the playing field. So it's really easy to say, well, I could find a way to make that individual eligible, the individual with paraplegia. I could find a way to make them eligible. But is it appropriate? That falls into that ethical guidelines that we as VR counselors and VR programs have to follow. We have to make that determination of, does the applicant require VR services? So that one gets a little convoluted at times and confusing. So please, if you have questions about that last step, feel free to throw them out there. We'll answer them as they come in. Suzanne, I saw you wanted to add one thing.
Not to what you were saying, but I want to make sure that we don't overlook what's happening in the chat box. And number 2 created a Pandora box of questions about homelessness. And what do we do about homeless people? There's homeless shelters. And this is a significant problem. When I was a director, one of the things we never termed somebody homeless, although they were, because they went from one relative to another relative and slept on couches. They just went from one place to another. But if no one is willing to step up, no relative is willing to say you can use my address as a place of residence, then that creates another challenge. We sometimes would use the tribal office as an address for residency because they can go to the tribal office and get any mail that they might need or something of that nature. So I would really like to hear some comments from folks. let's see, there was something, Clyde talked about homelessness. I think Gloria also, there was quite a bit talking about the homelessness. Are there any other comments about in terms of, you know, maybe Wayne, what did you use for homeless? And is there anyone else out there that has a solution to the homeless and not having an address?
You know, the homeless issue is always a huge one, and that's part of where our culturally appropriate services come into play from our programs. We know our communities, we know kind of what's happening there. As long as I could show a physical address for that individual, there was one individual that, through, I would say, choices of his own, he lived in a tent year round. That was his deal. He pitched a tent, and he actually lived out under a bridge outside of town, but it had a physical address that we could put on it. And that was one of the maps that I drew on napkins. It was, but it had a physical address. I could show proof of residency. The other thing is I utilized our emergency disaster program that was plotting all of the residents for the ambulance crews. And that's from here. I see notarized statements from households that goes along that same path. I would send them over to that office, to the emergency disaster office. They would print out a sheet saying that so-and-so lived at this address. They're I don't know, a bona fide reservation person. I don't know. I just ran out of the language I was trying to say. Complete brain fart. Sorry, guys. Anyways, I got a letter that just showed that they lived there. Residency letter is what we called it.
We have a question from Dottie to everyone. What if you have a client with a broken shoulder and our program provided accommodations for her and the employer now? She ended up being terminated because her doctor said she could work 4 hours a day until further notice. Basically, the Americans with Disability Act is not something that is recognized in tribal communities. But do you have a fair, you know, is there some process that you have? It wouldn't be a fair hearing process because it's not allocated against a tribal BR program. But, you know, this is where the self-advocacy in terms of I have a disability, I know my strengths and weaknesses, versus a doctor, a medical doctor that may have a different point of view. You know, this is something that may have, this looks like it will have to be explored definitely outside the realm of what you can do. You might want to check with CAP, the Client Assistance Program, to see if they have any ideas. Anybody else have any ideas for Dottie? You know, trying to fight the medical system.
Well, in this situation, it seems like it's a education situation with the employer. And it also comes into play where this is a conversation, like you said, with CAP. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with eligibility other than limited work scope. So that's another area that we could discuss. I'll reach out to you after the call or after the webinar, and we can discuss that further.
But one of the things that, in terms of advocacy with the employer, that would be something, as Wayne said, the employer does need to be educated, and that's for everybody, so that everybody knows that, you know, this is a good question for all of us to look at, and so that we can make sure that when we use the term integrated setting, the doctor is saying, in essence, this individual can work in an integrated setting, but only 4 hours. So there has to be a dialogue between, maybe not from you necessarily, but with the consumer, the patient and doctor, and maybe you and the consumer and the employer. So good questions. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and move down, John. So here's what we talked about, you know, the VR counselor signature, program director signature, and then this is the office use box. It talks about eligible or ineligible, date of eligibility or date of ineligibility, and then the initials of the counselor or the program director. Now, this form that we have here is more of a narrative form. We have another form that's more of just a direct form that'll be up also for download as well. So that's the tool itself. That's the form that would go into your file or be saved into your file. It captures all of the 6 criteria and identifies how those criteria were recognized. Now we're going to move into the other pages, and this is that disability level tool. It identifies and defines some terms that we throw around quite regularly as professionals and in determining eligibility.
Wayne, excuse me, before you move on, is there any more dialogue in terms of the 6 eligibility criteria? Does everybody feel comfortable with the 6 criteria and how you record it in your case notes, how you would record it on this great tool that has been presented here, that Wayne worked very hard on putting together. But is something, is everybody feeling good about it? Are there any questions before we move on? I know we had good questions in the chat box, but anybody willing to say something verbally? Okay.
So when we look at this next form, this is what I utilize a lot in determining daily living activities and the impediments that the disability creates in those daily living activities. So as you look through this form, you're going to see communication. That's the first daily living activity that we look at. So you ask yourself, does the disability impact or create significant limitations being understood by supervisors, co-workers, and others necessary to the degree to engage in work? So does the individual experience any language difficulty or comprehension of language? Is there a speech impediment? Is there a barrier to, you know, a lisp with like a cleft palate, that type of thing? That makes it really difficult for the people to understand that he's working around. You check it. Moving on to the next one. Do they have significant limitations understanding communications? Check it. You know, that's how you use the form. You just go through and you look at all the things that the individual has presented to you or that you have observed in your interactions with that consumer, and you check it. At the end of the list, you're going to be able to go back through and you can start looking at how you're going to address those barriers and limitations in your determination of eligibility and in your service provision when you complete the certificate of eligibility. So if you go ahead and scroll on down, you know, there's interpersonal skills, there's mobility, motor skills, self-care. There's seven different areas of living, daily activity living that we look at. Self-direction, work skills. You just go through and you find out what is impacted by your disability that is being identified by your consumers to determine limitations, and then you mark it, and then that helps decide and develop what services you're going to be providing.
We have another question. for a question from the chat box. Tess is asking, for Frida is asking, is a cleft palate a disability? What do you think? I'm going to put it out there. I have the answer, and I think most of you do, but let's have people come off of their microphone and say something. Lisa, what do you think? Lisa Wheeler over in California.
Hello. Hello. How are you?
Okay, we have somebody, Steve.
There we go.
Steve, we have you. You're on. You're you're sharing your private conversations with us.
No, that was Burdette. He muted himself.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Steve. Sorry, Steve. Okay. Come on. Want to hear from some people. We've been doing.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Lisa. I believe it would have to do with what type of employment that the consumer was wanting to obtain or had obtained. And there again, it goes back to how is it limiting their ability to work?
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. No, there's no really wrong answer in VR. There may need an expansion on something like a cleft palate, the look of a cleft palate, the sound of a cleft palate, all of the things that may have happened to an individual in their journey as a young person, that puts up barriers, emotional barriers to being included. Yeah, Wayne.
So the general, I have to pee. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
The general outline that we follow with a disability or identifying a disability is it has to be permanent. It has to create a permanent impairment. So an example that I see a lot of times, people come in and they're like, "Oh, I have a broken leg, so I have to have, I need your services because I have a broken leg." Well, your broken leg is going to heal within 6 to 8 weeks. Not necessarily an impediment to employment, not necessarily a permanent impact in your life. Now that same person comes in 2 years later and they're like, "Man, I got in a bad wreck, had a compound fracture. They had to cut 3 inches of bone out of my leg. Now I'm going to have a shorter leg for the rest of my life, and I have a gait disruption, and it creates issues within my spine." So now you can start seeing how that difference identified disability takes place, right? So now we have a permanent issue. We have impairments that are created from that permanent issue, and now we can define it as a disability. I hope, Frida, that answered your question. And I know you get frustrated with me sometimes when you ask me questions because I'm always like, "Well, it depends." So again, it depends on the situation. All right, John.
I'm kind of dealing with that right now. I have someone who was recently in a vehicle collision, wanting services, but at the same time, I mean, I can't see how long lasting the effects of that collision is going to be on that person. I mean, just like you said, them bones may heal.
Yep.
Who knows? So how much longer should I wait before we actually get a physical for that person? Because I mean, they did involve quite a few broken bones, but outside of what is the normal thing for a broken bone, I can't see any kind of limitations yet.
So that's a great example, and I really appreciate you bringing that forward. It's going to allow us to have a great discussion here. We see this a lot, especially in our rural reservation areas. There's a lot of vehicular accidents and trauma, and we see a lot of people, or even just being in rural areas, falling off cliffs or in high dangerous work environments. And we get to, people coming in and they're just fresh out of the hospital, or they're fresh, they're still in the hospital wanting services. And we have, in our language, we have a statement that says they have to be able to actively participate in services, in the VR activities and services. So when we start looking at that, that kind of shifts directions on what type of work they're looking for. So this individual that, let's say they have multiple broken bones, and you get a report from the doctor, and the doctor is able to make a recommendation that maximum medical improvement has been made, MMI, and that individual is going to have limitations based off of these accidents or these broken bones permanently. So in that situation, you'd be able to start looking at developing an eligibility for that individual based off of the doctor's information. Now, once you determine eligibility, then you start looking at service provision, right? So let's say they're still in the healing process. They've reached MMI, but they're still healing from the injuries that were sustained. And if the individual says, well, I want to go back and be a flagger right now on a construction crew, you're going to have to say, I can't support your plan at this point because you're not physically able to participate in VR services or activities to obtain that employment. But if that individual is saying, I need to find a new career because physically I can't go back to my previous work, then you could say, okay, what type of training, and then you can start seeing that exploration develop and take place in the development of that plan, which is separate from eligibility, right? So the eligibility, we had to look at what the doctor was saying. Is there a permanent impediment from these injuries? Have they reached MMI? Is there ongoing therapy? So that is a great example. The other example I always get questioned on is somebody in treatment. A lot of treatment facilities in our areas, in our reservation areas, are sending people over before they graduate treatment. And we always have to ask that question, are they available to participate in activities? Well, if they're in inpatient treatment, by that definition, they're not available to participate in services. So we can't take an application. We can't even determine eligibility because we can't get them to our office to participate in the application process. Same thing with incarceration. When people are in jail, if they're getting ready to get out and they know they're diagnosed with a mental health or a physical disability, a lot of the jails and prisons and stuff will refer people to voc rehab, but until they are fully able to participate in VR activity and services, there's nothing we can do until they are able to sit at our desk. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So with all of that, did I answer your question, or did I just ramble on in nothingness like I normally do?
Well, for me, I think some people don't know really the scope of what we do. And so even in this instance, this person made a comment. I don't have limitations. I plan to go right back to work. So in some instances, just trying to get services that they're not really available to them because they're not truly eligible for the program.
So see, that goes along with my other soapbox that I always get on, and that's VR is not an entitled program. VR is an eligibility-based program. And all of our programs in Indian country, for the most part, are entitled programs. So they just come in and they receive services, whether it's monetary or support services. So this mindset is developed on our reservations that if we show up, we're going to get a service. And so when we start to say no, it really upsets people. But that's where we're at. We want to always err on the side of the consumer, but we also have to protect our federal funds. We also have to protect our program integrity, and we also have to follow the ethical guidelines of the CRC, which governs all voc rehab service provision. So we have to make sure that we take care of our stuff first, and then we can err on the side of the consumer. Man,
I
that was
have,
way off track. Wow.
I have a couple of questions. First, I'm going to put out something about number 6, a question about number 6. The criteria, someone had requested that this be read again. The number 6, the applicant requires VR services to prepare for, enter into, engage in, or retain employment consistent with their applicant's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, ability, capabilities, and informed choice. Basically, that takes the theme of the RSA purpose statement, and this is the goal, is that all of these adjectives, if you want to say, they all need to be addressed when you're considering somebody for eligibility into the program. And we can explore that a little bit more if you would like. But for now, I'd like to leave that one alone for a few minutes and go to a question about number 1. The applicant has proof of membership in a state or federally recognized tribe. Do you all have a policy or a procedure that if somebody comes in the door and they don't have proof, bless you, Dottie. So what would you do? Does anybody have any comments that they would like to, and maybe verbally might be helpful? Let's see. Megan, are you available to answer a question? Did you get your speakerphone up and running? Anyone else? Because there is a process. If they don't have proof, what do? You just say, oh, well, you don't take them in the program. You don't advise them what the next step might be so that they can get the proof. You know, they don't have a social security card. They don't have, and they don't have their tribal ID. So Gloria says, we always ask for a tribal enrollment card, or we contact other tribes for proof of enrollment. Sometimes we would send someone to the enrollment office. They might have to find a birth certificate. They might need to be able to get a birth certificate to prove that they are a member of a tribe. It's not such a, anybody else have any, Wayne, do you have ever had that problem where somebody come in, they didn't have ID?
Oh yeah, we would send them to the enrollment office. You know, we'd request, we'd have them sign a release of information. We'd contact the tribe they're from, and just all of that stuff. You know, if it's during application, I would encourage them to not complete the application at that point. Let's go get the tribal documentation first, and then come back in and see me, and I'd work with them during that period of time. You know, our primary service under AIVRS programs is referral. That's one of our number 1 services is referral. Number 2 is counseling and guidance. Okay. In my opinion, in my view, that counseling and guidance didn't have to happen to an open case. If I had an applicant that was struggling to get the documentation together, I would help them find that documentation through whatever means necessary to get. And then once they had it all, you know, especially the residency and the enrollment information, then we'd take an application and move forward. I didn't want to have that infringing on our 60-day time frame, simply because a lot of times tribal departments are really slow. I mean, we've all worked within those time frames, and we've all worked with IHS trying to get documentation, and it did set us back several times. Sorry, I had a message come in from Theron.
While you're doing that,
Perfect. Gloria.
I would like to ask, are we moving on? Is it okay to move on? Or do you have something you want to add?
I was just saying that Gloria provided some really good feedback.
Yes, she is. Gloria talks about helping somebody find a birth certificate, and then the CRIT for them to show proof of enrollment for our program or other tribal entities. It costs $10, and some do not even have that. We assist during the exploration process. Good job.
So can we go back to the 6 questions now?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about about ineligibility. We've talked about eligibility, but we haven't touched on what happens. Do you have a process? And we don't have to answer it right now. So you're going to go over the 6 eligibility criteria, but what happens if somebody's ineligible? What is your process? I'm going to leave it at that. Go ahead, Wayne.
So can we go back, John, to the original 6 questions in the slide?
He had them up. He just had, oh.
No, he had the criteria up. Go up to the 6, oh, down 1, down 2. Good. 1 more. No, now we're all lost.
No, he had it there. It's right here. 6 eligibility.
That's the criteria. I want the 6 questions that we asked at the beginning of the PowerPoint.
Oh.
Right there. All right. So we got all that taken care of. Now I want to take some time. It's 12 o'clock or 12 or wherever you're
11.
at right now. It's 10 after the hour, wherever we're at. And we have about 20 minutes left. And I would like to take this time to do an open discussion on these 6 questions. And before we jump into that and open the mic up, I want to, again, answer some of the questions that Suzanne had about the ineligibility. So we call it the Certificate of Eligibility Tool and Ineligibility Tool, because it allows us to have one document to make that determination in. And anytime out of the 6 criteria, we don't have one that is met, they're not eligible. It's not a 5 out of 6 or 3 out of 6. It has to be all 6 criteria met to become eligible for the program. So it gets really scary for people to determine that ineligibility, because it opens the door for CAP to get involved. It opens the door for people to be upset and angry. And I think that really is where Suzanne was going with the process. What's the closer process you guys have for that ineligibility? Do you have it in place? Do you have the tools set up to handle all of those things? Do you have the policies in place to direct the due process and the appeals and CAP's involvement? Those are all things that we need to look at in determining ineligibility. Did I capture kind of what you were looking at, Suzanne?
Yes, that, and then one other step. If an individual has a significant disability and you're not able to provide VR services because of the disability is significant, what is the process for that? Because, as you said, you have to have, all 6. You have to meet all 6, and that physical, mental disability that may be a barrier to employment can be so significant that even with VR services, we wouldn't be able to assist this individual in acquiring employment.
So in that case, that kind of falls under number 6 of the questions that we asked. If an external assessment is required, can your AIVRS program pay for those services before an individual is determined eligible or ineligible for VR services? So the quick question, or the quick answer to that question is yes. Under under assessment, you can pay for an assessment or an evaluation to be completed to determine eligibility for that individual. Now, in the case where an individual is too significant or significantly disabled to the point where they cannot benefit or meet other criteria for eligibility, you have to have doctor's documentation stating that they're too significantly or too severe to work. You have to have completed an integrated assessment in the community showing those assessment results that do not support working. And once all of those documentations are gathered, then within a year of determining them ineligible, you have to do a follow-up contact to that individual. And you ask them, are you still interested in pursuing services? Has anything changed with your disability? Do you have any improvements in the disability? So based off those answers, then if they say no, everything's the same, then you would just say, okay, we're still going to determine you ineligible for services and we aren't going to pursue this any further. But you have to do that annual follow-up call if you determine somebody's too severe or too severe to be eligible for services. Good?
Yeah, good.
All right.
Thank you. Good job.
Suzanne's always throwing stuff at me to make me think when I'm on the spot.
Sorry,
now
Wayne.
my brain hurts. So let's take a moment now and go back and answer these questions after we've had our discussion. Is there any volunteers to jump on and help me answer number one?
This is your webinar. Come on, folks. Unmute your microphones and unmute your videos and join us. Pretend we're at a talking circle. We would see your beautiful faces.
Gloria just threw out there 371. Regs 371. I'm going to start picking somebody pretty quick.
It's the counselors. And I guess in some situations, maybe your directors don't want to file agreements against me. Yes.
That's a good point, isn't it? So in your eligibility process, in your AIVRS program, you have to include in your policies and procedures that due process, which is taken into account during eligibility. So what was stated was that counselors determine eligibility, and then we also have our backup for directors, right? So if we have an opportunity where somebody doesn't agree with our decision, then they have the opportunity to go up to the director and challenge that and do the due process. So the short answer is that we determine who, I guess it's not really short, we determine who our experts are, and we allow that person to make that determination. So usually that's a VR counselor and or director. In some programs, the AIVRTTAC does have a piece in the eligibility, but it does come down to the VR counselor and director making the final decision of eligibility.
And herein lies sometimes a challenge, because if a potential consumer is not satisfied with an answer and goes above and doesn't go through due process with, or do you have a due process with, it goes from VR counselor to director, may go directly to the tribal offices and might go to council, and you might be told by your council that this person has to be made eligible for the program. And that's where then we have an education of tribal council that may have to take place. And this creates a real significant challenge for VR programs when there is a disparity between what is going on with one of the tribe's programs and the tribal council, the leadership. So sometimes it's really very good if you don't have a tribal resolution in terms of fair hearing process, you may consider doing that. And we are in the process of making sure that we have something available in our toolkit at some day in terms of what that might be. But it would be nice if you would share among all of us what is your process in the event that you're being overridden. Anybody have any comments they want to make on that?
So Tess and company, I think it's probably, is it Frida's asking this? Or stating, I don't know any of this computer stuff in a class by itself. I know, me too, I get it. John is my lifesaver here. The first question for me is the counselor and get it approved by my boss. Most likely when I get stuck, I wait until I talk to my boss. So that's another great point is that staffing of cases, that ability to staff these cases during team meetings or even one-on-ones. Just, we deal with a lot of significant disabilities that have a lot of significant characteristics, and we want to make sure that we're addressing all of them. So staffing with other people is very beneficial. And she's saying that we have that they do staffings weekly to address these issues. So that's great. I really encourage that.
Wayne? Wayne?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? This is Daryl.
Hi,
Welcome, Daryl.
Hey, guys. I just wanted to add a couple of points about the question related to who determines eligibility and ineligibility. Just I think a point of reference too for directors out there, that what I've learned, and I think we've learned as AIVRTTAC working with programs as we do our initial review, is that we've come across situations where we've identified in the case file reviews where individuals maybe weren't necessarily qualified for services based on our initial review of the documents and information within the case file. And we could connect some of that to awareness and training of the VR counselors who were determining eligibility. And I think what I'm getting at is that, it's really important that as directors or program managers, we're ensuring that those who are in the place of determining eligibility are adequately trained, in terms of what criteria to look at, what is the appropriate information to be in the file, and then how do they make that determination? Because programs are different across the board. Some tribal VR programs only require that the counselor determine eligibility. And then other programs will do a two-step process where it goes to the counselor and then the director does a final approval. So depending on those setups, I think it's really important that at the initial stage, there's adequate awareness and training of the criteria for determining eligibility. I just want to share that with everyone.
Thank you, Daryl. Good points.
All right, so on number 2, well, Gloria put in a lot of information here also about educating the council and that really that tough line that we walk, being very respectful in approaching our council and provide that information to them. And I just responded that absolutely, it's a tough walk. We have all experienced when council gets upset with us at some point or other, and just gently reminding them that we are a pass-through grant can be very, very difficult at times. So number 2, when does an AIVRS program staff member start to evaluate the eligibility and ineligibility of an applicant? Throwing that out there. And if you look over here in the corner, if you move your mouse over there, there's a microphone, you can unclick it. Just kind of, throwing that out there for people. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing my voice. All right, Lisa, you're on the spot. Nobody else jumped in there. It's your turn. Lisa. All right, Clyde, you're up.
Megan, did you get your microphone working?
So we put them all to sleep,
Yes, and
or
we're
they went to
coming.
lunch, or I don't know. Dottie, how about you? What do you think, Dottie?
And we also need to give people time to fill out the survey. So we might be at a point where
I'll just answer the questions. How's that? I'll just give some feedback.
Yeah.
So one of the things I saw in here was that it's starts at application. Absolutely. When we start to evaluate the eligibility, ineligibility, when we meet the individual, what are the that's a kind of a comprehensive assessment that we do. Do they struggle talking? Can they track what we're talking about? Are they remaining focused? Can they sit comfortably? All those things we're looking at starts at application. We talk to family members, we talk to the individual, we look at medical information. All those things come into play in determining eligibility. Number three.
And if you have an orientation process, it might even start as early as that. Basically, you're always, the minute you meet somebody that's requesting services, you're starting to analyze whether they're eligible or not. Sorry, go ahead, Lorraine. Number three.
And so we identified the 6 eligibility criteria in the PowerPoint. We talked about how they're determined and documented. Again, it's based on the documentation that we, and data we receive, the evaluations that we look at, the assessments that we do. It's documented both in the eligibility document, but also within the case note. We gotta make sure we have that storyline in place to support whatever we do. Number 4, what are the steps for documenting eligibility and ineligibility? We went through it, right? You have to identify that they meet all 6 criteria. You have to create a certificate of eligibility or ineligibility. It has to be in the file. You have to have the supporting documentation in the file, and you need to have the case note that goes with it in documenting that eligibility.
Bravo. You get a star.
If an applicant cannot be determined eligible, they're ineligible. We talked about having a program that has policy and procedures, the due process, the cap information, all of that's included in that ineligibility. And we send them a letter saying they're ineligible. We have a certificate that says they're ineligible that documents and justifies why. We have to provide that information to the individual. We can't just close them and never talk to them. We have to contact them and let them know and explain to them why they're being closed.
And a date for when we'll be reviewed, a closure date and a date for when their case can be reviewed again.
Well, that's only if they're significantly disabled. If they're severely disabled, right.
Right. So you have to make sure we have both. We're considering both parts. Okay.
And then number 6, we already answered. So yes, you can pay for assessments before they are eligible. That's part of we can pay but it has to be only for eligibility. It can't be for anything else. The assessment has to be focused on determining eligibility.
Right.
Okay, John, can you take us through to the last
13,
3 slides?
Slide 13.
So we got November 16th, we have a talking circle. It's going to be the team. We're going to be all together talking about the...
That's that's November 26th.
Oh, look at me. I'm totally missing the boat there.
No, it's okay.
I just subtracted 10 days because I was so excited. No.
So
the 26th is the correct date. And then we, in December, January, we're not going to have a webinar or talking circle. We're going to enjoy the holidays. We're going to hoop it up at KNR in New Orleans, eating some good seafood. Y'all need to come down and see us. We're going to be there. KNR is going to be there. Or KNR. AIVRTTAC is going to be there. And then the consumer satisfaction survey, we're going to send one out on February 25th.
Daryl, Joseph, and Arden Day will be providing that webinar.
Okay.
So that'll be in 2020. We will, the next time we meet in a setting like this will be the new year. So, and then slide 14, please. And John has been providing, John, please provide, there you go. John provided the survey in the chat box, and it's provided here on this slide. Wayne started our presentation this morning begging for everyone to please fill out the survey.
And Suzanne's going to finish it begging for the survey.
That's
please.
right. And there is the survey. John has posted it so you can see what it looks like. Please help us out. We need to know what we're doing right and what we're doing, what needs to be corrected. We really strive to provide you the information that you're asking. And in order for us to continue to do that, we need to have some feedback as to what we missed and how we can fill in, or what other things do you want to piggyback on the eligibility and eligibility tool that has been presented today.
So I'd like to close out the webinar by reminding everybody that AIVRTTAC is currently recruiting for another intensive technical assistance, which is our on-site intensive TA services that we provide program. So please reach out to Dr. Lee Gashioma. Let him know that you're interested in it, or you can email all of us, and we can get you that information so you can talk to Lee and get you some support and help.
And it might be a nice time to say that we're sad that Daryl's hours have been reduced, but we're going to be happy to introduce you to a new team member, and she'll be joining Wayne and Winona at the KNAR conference. And her name is Jamie, and please look for her. We are really excited about her coming on board at the beginning of November. And so we'd like to do a warm welcome at this time for the new colleague at AIVRTTAC and for a new TA specialist. But fortunately, we will have Daryl, even though it's only 10%, he gives more than 10%. So we're always happy whenever he can be a part of whatever it is that we're doing. He's still the AIVRTTAC family. So. Any comments, questions? Are you filling out your surveys? I can hear you ticking away on your computer, filling out the survey.
All right, thanks guys.
All right. Have a great day. Have a great rest of your week. And Wayne, Winona, and Jamie will see you at KNAR. Please look for them.
Serena, if you go to the chat, you'll see the tiny url.com. Just click on that link. It should take you to the webinar or to the survey. Thanks, everybody.